Okay. Welcome everyone to the second edition of this 2026 Naturalist webinar series. My name is Dana Ripper. I'm with the Missouri River Bird Observatory, or MRBO. And also with us tonight is my MRBO co-founder and co-director, Ethan Duke. We want to wish everyone a happy World Wetlands Day, which is an international celebration that occurs every February 2nd. And of course, it's very relevant to tonight's session. Here at MRBO, our mission is the conservation of birds and all wildlife and their habitats through science, education, and advocacy. And if you weren't on during the last naturalist session, if you're interested in a broader background on our organization, please peruse our website, or you can check out the recording of the January 19th webinar, where I gave a longer intro to the organization. In the spirit of our conservation mission, we really hope that these webinars will inform you and inspire you to conserve our fellow creatures of all kinds and all habitats. Also, want to make a quick note that you can see all of our upcoming events, both virtual and in person, on our website at mrbo.org. The MRBO team is constantly out and about giving various programs, and you are most welcome to join us. Shout out to Kansas City folks. We are hosting an appreciation party for our MRBO supporters on the Kansas side, Prairie Village, Kansas, on February 11th. I will put that link in the chat and also the link to our calendar. I'm going to throw those in there right now. And then finally, just so you know, we are recording this webinar and all the webinars, and they will be available on the MRBO YouTube channel, which is here. I'm going to put that in the chat as well. So please feel free to rewatch or definitely share with other folks. And without further ado, we're going on to our webinar of the evening. We are very happy to welcome Brittany Harried of the Missouri Department of Conservation to speak with us tonight about Missouri's fishes. Dr. Harried is the coordinator for the Resource Assessment and Monitoring, acronym RAM, program at the Missouri Department of Conservation. The RAM program is a long-term statewide monitoring program that was founded in the early 2000s and is used to assess the health of Missouri's wadable streams. This program collects data related to water quality, physical habitat, fish communities, and macroinvertebrate communities, which can then be used to calculate health metrics for the streams. Prior to starting at MDC, Brittany was a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Missouri, where she assessed the thermal ecology of rare stream fish in Missouri and conducted stream surveys to assess populations of blue-striped darters, a species of conservation concern that is endemic to Missouri. Brittany completed her PhD in 2021 from the University of North Texas, where she studied functional traits in streamfish and how we can use these traits to predict species responses to changes in their environment. She also has a Master's of Science in Biology and a a Bachelor's of Science degree in Aquatic Biology from the University of Wisconsin at La Crosse. During her graduate degrees, Brittany also taught lab courses in biology, fish diversity and ecology, community ecology, and environmental science. So we're really excited to have you, and please take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you everyone for tuning in tonight. So my talk today is going to be an introduction of the fishes that you find in the Missouri River. But before we get into that, I wanted to provide some context about the Missouri River itself. So the Missouri River Basin, which is pictured in green, let's see here, laser pointer. Pictured in green here, starting off in Montana and working its way down into Missouri. This is the longest river in the United States. The watershed encompasses more than 500,000 miles or square miles and includes 10 states and 1 Canadian province. It also encompasses 1/6 of the US, and it's a really important for agriculture in this region, water supply, power, flood control, fish and wildlife, water quality, irrigation, and navigation. And then lastly, I also wanted to point out that the portion of the Missouri River in Missouri itself is unimpounded, meaning that there's no dams present. So looking kind of again at that whole watershed, but also focusing on the portions in Missouri, There are 4 major watersheds that flow directly into the Missouri River, and this includes the Sheraton River, the Grand River, the Osage River to the south, and the Gasconade River. We also have 3 aquatic faunal regions of Missouri, and these explain a lot of our fish distributions, as there are a lot of species that you can only find in one of these 3 ecoregions in Missouri. So to the north, we have our prairie region, and these streams are usually characterized by being more turbid, so more cloudy, being channelized streams that have a lot of silt, sand, and gravel substrates, so really like soft, not rocky substrate. Moving to the south, we have our Ozark region. These are characterized by being clear streams consisting of short pools with well-defined riffles, so a lot of oxygenated moving water that have more gravel, bedrock, and boulder substrates. And then down in the Boot Heel, we have the Mississippi Alluvial Valley, or our lowland ecoregion. And this is a mix of streams, wetlands, and ditches that can range from clear to turbid water that usually have silt and sand substrates, but can also occasionally have gravel substrates. Looking at fish diversity as a whole across the U.S. with a, again, specific focus in Missouri, the Southeast United States in general is a real hotspot for fish diversity in the United States, and we have higher diversity in the southeast part of the state, and this decreases as you move up to the northwest. But total in Missouri, we have about 244 known fish species. 227 of these are native to the state. 10 are transient, and these are ones that you're going to find more in the Mississippi River and the Missouri River that will migrate up for reproduction during certain times of the year. And we have about 17 non-native species as well. So I just wanted to point out some of the kind of really common ones that you may have heard of before, but I'm not going to spend time on these just because it's not the focus for the talk today. But some of the really common invasive species that we have in the state include goldfish, grass carp, common carp, silver carp, bighead carp, black carp, and snakehead. And the snakehead is a relatively new invader that we're finding in the southern parts of the state. Looking at kind of the fish diversity for Missouri, we have 29 families of fish. So those about 240 some species are separated across these families. But I'm going to focus on a handful of these today, which are the main species that we typically find in the Missouri River. So I'll just be going through each of these groups, providing some examples of species that are iconic for the Missouri River and some information about each of those. So starting with our lamprey, a really notable species is our chestnut lamprey. The scientific name is Ichthyomyzon castaneus, which means fish to suck and of chestnut color. The image in the middle shows all of those circular rows of teeth. This is a jawless fish that will suction on and parasitize on other fish in their adult form. And this is one of 2 parasitic lamprey species that we have in the state. The adults reach about 10 to 12 inches at maturity, and the adults will migrate into tributaries, or those smaller streams that flow into the Missouri River, in late winter and spring for spawning. Moving on to our next group, the sturgeon. We have several notable species in the Missouri River. The first that I'll talk about is our shovel-nosed sturgeon. So the scientific name is Scaphorhynchus platyrhynchus, which means spade snout and broad snout. This is the smallest sturgeon species that we have in North America. They can reach up to about 30 inches and 5 pounds, and it's also the most abundant sturgeon species in Missouri. Despite being the most abundant, they are declining due to overharvest, dam construction, and habitat alteration. Their lifespan is approximately 14 years, and it takes 5 to 7 years for them to become sexually mature. So that's a really long time from when they hatch out of their eggs to when they're able to contribute back to the population. They've been documented to travel up to 560 miles for spawning, which is an incredible distance. And they're permitted for sport fish for recreation only. This gets a little difficult too because they look very similar to our extremely rare pallid sturgeon, which is another kind of iconic species in the state. They have very similar body shapes, and especially that kind of spade-shaped snout. So our pallid sturgeon, its scientific name is Scaphorhynchus albus, which means spade snout and white. This is listed both federally and state as endangered. They reach similar sizes to some of our other larger species in the state. So they can reach up to 5 feet and 100 pounds. They can live up to 40 years, and it takes about 7 years for males and 15 to 20 years for females to reach sexual maturity. And their decline has primarily been due to overharvest, dam construction, and habitat loss. The third sturgeon species that I wanted to highlight is the lake sturgeon. So its scientific name is Acropensor fulvescens, which means sturgeon and reddish yellow, and that's due to the color of their body. These are monsters, so they can reach 8 feet and up to 300 pounds. And there's some pictures on the right that show how big they can get. They're a very common and economically important fish in Missouri. And prior to 1900, in 1 year alone, there were about 50,000 pounds harvested from the Missouri and Mississippi rivers. They can take up to 10 years for males and 30 years for females to reach maturity, and adults will migrate to the streams that they hatched from for spawning. So they'll try to return. So they really need a lot of miles of unimpounded river in order to make it to those natal streams. And we think that the decline for this species has largely been due to overharvest, pollution, and dam construction. They were listed as state endangered in the 1970s, and stocking in Missouri, in order to help kind of boost their population size, began in the 1980s. And we had something pretty incredible happen not that long ago. So 2 years ago in April, spawning was documented on the Osage River. We had a citizen call the Missouri Department of Conservation and say, hey, I think that there are some sturgeon that are spawning on some rocks. And so our biologists went out and were able to document spawning and also find eggs that were laid as well. So this is the first time in a really long time that we've seen natural reproduction for lake sturgeon. So this was a huge win and really exciting for us. One thing that I'll also mention before moving on to our next group of fish is that lake sturgeon are also a kind of prehistoric fish. So we can find this species almost unchanged back in the fossil record, dating back millions of years. So if anyone ever tells you that dinosaurs don't exist anymore, you can look at sturgeon. So our next group is the paddlefish, and a lot of you are probably familiar with this. So their scientific name is called Polyodon spathula, meaning many tooth and spatula or blade. And the picture on the top on the right shows how they feed. So they'll actually swim around with their mouth open like this, and they're filter feeding out really small organisms in the water for their food. They're one of the largest North American freshwater fishes, reaching up to 7 feet and 160 pounds. They are Missouri's officially designated aquatic animal, and this is the only living member of its family on Earth since the Chinese paddlefish has gone extinct. They grow really rapidly and can reach 10 to 14 inches in their first year, and by age 17, they can reach 60 inches, and they can live to be 30 years old or more. They're also valued as a sport fish and for its caviar. So as I mentioned with that previous picture, they swim continuously near the surface for feeding in open waters and big rivers like the Missouri and the Mississippi River. But dam construction, stream channelization, levee construction, and drainage of our bottomlands have cut off a lot of their habitat for spawning, which has really negatively affected their ability to recruit new individuals into the population. So because of this, a lot of artificial propagation through human-run fish hatcheries have been used to stock small individuals, like the one pictured on the bottom, to help maintain the species and their populations. And similar to the sturgeon, we're seeing a lot of decline due to overharvesting, as well as illegal poaching, trafficking, and invasive species. And the zebra mussel is a really notable invasive species that's impacting the paddlefish, since they're also a filter feeder, and they're basically removing a lot of the food that the paddlefish rely on for growth and survival. And the paddlefish is also an ancient fish like the sturgeon. So our next group of fish are the gar, and we have 4 different species in the state. The first one I'll talk about is the long-nosed gar. So their scientific name is Lepisosteus osseus, which means bony scale and of bone. So their entire body is covered in these almost bony scales that are made up of something called ganoin, which is really similar to the enamel in our teeth. So they're literally covered in a bony armor. And this is also an ancient family of fish that you can find back in the fossil record. They can get quite large, reaching up to 60 inches and 30 pounds, and can grow up to 20 inches in their first year. It takes males about 3 to 4 years to mature, and females will mature at about 6 years of age. The males rarely live more than 11 years and tend to be smaller, not really exceeding 3 feet in length, whereas the females can live 20 years or more and can reach 4.5 feet or more in length. Our second species in Missouri that's really common is the short-nosed gar. So this is Lepisosteus platystomus, which means bony scale and broad mouth. They can reach 32 inches and 6 to 11 pounds. So this is a smaller species than the long-nosed gar. But all of our gar species can grow really rapidly from when they hatch from their eggs, and they can grow up to about 7 inches in a few months and become sexually mature at 3 years and about 15 inches. And gar get a bad rap because of their pointy little teeth, but I think they're quite cute, especially when you get views of them like this and like this. They're also a really misunderstood fish. So they were considered a nuisance or a trash fish by many people historically and still today, because they can feed on, they were thought to have been feeding on or competing for food with more desirable fishes, like think our bass, for example. But they're actually really important apex predators and serve as natural control for preventing overpopulation, unbalanced fish populations. So you can kind of consider them like the wolves of our rivers. And then the photo on the bottom and the screen grab on the upper right is showing an instance in which the conservation department in North Carolina used dynamite to try to remove concentrations of large-nosed gar from rivers. And this was a pretty common practice in the US. So again, gar had a bad rap. Some of them still do. And there are a lot of people that are either afraid of them or just don't outright like them. But they're a really, really important species to have in our rivers. So moving on to our next group, the moon-eye group. One of our notable species here is the gold-eye. Their scientific name is Hyodon turgicis, which means toothed hyoid, since they have kind of tooth structures on their tongue, and polished, which refers to their scales being really shiny. They also have a golden eye, which is where they get their name. They can reach about 13 inches and 3/4 pounds, and they're a predatory fish that primarily feed at night. And an interesting fact about this species is that they're actually a larval host for a state and federally endangered freshwater mussel called the spectacle case, which uses the goldeye and the mooneye for a host. Next group of fish are the American eel. So their scientific name is Anguilla rostrata, which means eel and beaked, since they look like a lot of eels that you might find in the ocean. The females can often reach 16 to 33 inches in length, and the males are smaller bodied, reaching only about 18 inches. All eels in Missouri are female, and this is because they migrate up from salt water in order to reproduce. They're uncommon to find in the state, but they likely occur in every large stream in the state. So this is going to include primarily the Mississippi River and the Missouri River, but it could also be things like the Gasconade or the Osage. And kind of like some of the other species I've already talked about, their migration is heavily restricted by dams. Our next group of fish are the shads. So we have a handful of shad species in the state, but I'm only going to focus on 2 here. The first being the Alabama shad. Their scientific name is Alosa alabamae, which means shad and from Alabama. They are a species of conservation concern and at risk of extirpation from the state due to habitat loss, among other things. The adults for this species can reach 18 inches and about 3 pounds. And then the gizzard shad is the most common shad species that you'll find in the state. Its scientific name is Dorosoma sapinianum, which means lance body, and named after an author, Citoyen Lacépède. They're one of the most common and widely distributed of the larger bodied Missouri fishes, and they'll form schools and are active hunters at night, and they'll often jump out of the water, which has earned them the nickname skipjack, even though skipjack is a completely different kind of fish. Our next group are the minnows. These are one of my favorite fish groups in the state. I have a soft spot for them. And this is a really huge group. So we have approximately 64 species that are considered minnows in the state. And this can include anything that has minnow in the name, our shiners, chubs, stone rollers, and dace. All of these species tend to be short-lived and small-bodied, with most species being under 3 inches, but with some larger ones reaching about 7 to 12 inches. These species mostly feed on insects and plant material in the streams, and they play really important roles for converting nutrients into food for our larger predatory fish. For our shiners, you typically find these in the water column and near the surface of the water. And something that I think is really interesting with fish is that you can often tell where in the water column they live based on where their mouth is pointing. So for a lot of our shiner species, they have what we call a terminal mouth. So that means that it kind of opens on the end. Usually these fish are found in more of that water column, whereas a fish that has kind of an upturned mouth, you're going to usually find at the surface, and one that has a mouth that's pointing down, you're going to find down at the bottom of the stream or the river. A lot of the shiners have a striking behavior while feeding. So you can kind of think of them, if you have ever seen a video of like piranhas attacking food, the shiners are kind of like our little piranhas of Missouri, just not with the sharp teeth. And they're also a really popular fish for microfishing. So a lot of people will target these and add them to their species list because, especially in the early summer when they're in their breeding colors, these are gorgeous, gorgeous fish. So the chubs also fall within this minnow family. These species are specialized for inhabiting the bottom of large turbid rivers, and you'll notice that they all have that kind of down-facing mouth. They also tend to have, in the Missouri River, reduced eye sizes and more external taste buds, which allows them to kind of navigate their environment better in that turbid water. And we don't find a lot of other small-bodied fishes here. They also tend to be short-lived and small-bodied and generally reach maximum sizes between 3 to 6 inches. There's also an interesting kind of connection between chub species and our sturgeon in the state. So these river chubs are really important food sources for our sturgeon species, which includes our federally endangered pallid sturgeon. And the sturgeon chub in particular gets its common name with the resemblance that it has to that of a sturgeon. And one kind of important thing to note is that both the sturgeon chub and the sturgeon species that rely on them for a food source are both facing similar environmental challenges. They both have similar foraging strategies. So even though they look unrelated, or that they are unrelated, it's not really surprising that they look similar since they live in the same place and they kind of eat the same things. So moving on to our next fish group are our suckers. One of the really kind of notable species in the state is our blue sucker. Its scientific name is Cycleptus elongatus, which means small round mouth and elongate. They can live for about 10 years, and the males will become sexually mature at 4 years, and females will become sexually mature at 6 years. They used to be a really commercially important fish species, and according to a lot of people, it was said to be the best food fish of all of the suckers in the state. Our world record blue sucker was caught in 2023 in Missouri, weighing 11 pounds and 5 ounces. And this is a really sentinel species for river health. So you're really only going to find these associated in rivers that have good water quality and good habitat. So any sections of river that have these is a really good thing. We also have our buffalo fishes, which are in this sucker family. So one of these species is the bigmouth buffalo. Its scientific name is Ichthyobus cyprinellus, which means bullfish and small carp, and they look really similar to a lot of our invasive carp species. The bigmouth buffalo is Missouri's biggest sucker, reaching a maximum of 48 inches and 80 pounds, and they are a very long-lived fish species, kind of like the gar, which I don't think I mentioned, but the lifespan of the bigmouth buffalo has been recorded up to 127 years. And as a general group, the buffalo fishes rank second in importance to carp in the commercial fishery in Mississippi and Missouri rivers. Another buffalo species we have in the state is the black buffalo. Its scientific name is Ichthyobus niger, which means bullfish and dark or black. And that's notable on the color of a lot of their fins being darker in color. They can reach lengths of 20 to 30 inches and a maximum weight of 53 pounds, and they can have been recorded living up to 108 years. And we had a state record black buffalo caught in 2019 from Duck Creek Conservation Area weighing 76 pounds, which is pictured in the bottom right corner. And then another buffalo species we have in the state is the smallmouth buffalo, and this one's my favorite of the buffalo fishes. Its scientific name is Ichthyobius bubalis, which means bullfish and buffalo, and they have that really prominent kind of hump that you'd picture in a lot of the buffaloes, like the mammal buffalo. This is the smallest of the buffalo species, only reaching lengths of about 15 to 30 inches and a maximum weight of 40 pounds, so still quite a big fish. And they're also really long-lived, with recorded ages reaching up to 101 years. And I just really love their faces. In our sucker family, we also have a handful of red horse species in the state. The most common red horse you're going to find in the Missouri River is the shorthead red horse. Its scientific name is Moxostoma macrolepidotum, which means mouth to suck and large-scaled. It's the most widely distributed red horse in Missouri in general, and adults can reach 9 to 16 inches and just over 4 pounds. One other really neat thing about our red horse is that you can ID a lot of them based on the shape and the small structures present on their lips. Moving on to our next group of fishes, we have our catfish. One of the most common species you're going to find or hear people talking about is the channel catfish. Its scientific name is Ictolurus punctatus, which means fish cat and spotted. And a lot of the really young fish will get these really cute polka dots on their sides, which will fade or disappear altogether when they become adults. The adults are typically 12 to 32 inches and 1 to 15 pounds, but we've had maximum records of 45-pound channel catfish. They typically live for 6 to 10 years, and they are omnivores, eating things like fish, insects, crayfish, mollusks, and plant material. They're the most abundant and widely distributed catfish in Missouri, and they were established as the official Missouri state fish in 1997, and they're one of the most highly prized game and food fishes in Missouri. A close relative to the channel catfish is the blue catfish, and a lot of people can often mix up between these two species which one that they have. The scientific name for blue catfish is Ictolurus furcatus, which means fish cat and forked. The adults typically reach 20 to 44 inches and 3 to 40 pounds, with record weights reaching 115 to 130 pounds. They can live for 21 or more years and are also a highly valued food fish. And they're carnivorous bottom feeders and can control populations of invertebrates and some fishes in the habitats they live in. And then our third prominent big river catfish is our flathead catfish. Their scientific name is Pylodictis olivaris, which means mudfish and olive colored. The adults commonly reach 15 to 45 inches and up to 45 pounds, though the record weight for this species is close to 100 pounds. They're a more solitary species compared to the other catfish. We rarely see them eating dead or decaying material, unlike the channel catfish, which is also a scavenger. They are also an important commercial and sport fish. Prior to the commercial fishery for catfish closing in Missouri, harvest of flathead catfish was more than 208,000 pounds. They're also referred to as granny cats in the Ozarks. Our next group of fish from the Missouri River are our smelt. The rainbow smelt is our main smelt species in Missouri. Its scientific name means Osmeris mordax, which means odorous and biting. I have not personally experienced this, but I have read in many places that when these fish are removed from the water, it smells like freshly cut cucumbers. They're a smaller bodied fish ranging from about 7 to 9 inches and up to 3 ounces, and their shiny scales appear to shimmer when they're underwater. Our next group of fish is our live bearers. So the most common one you're going to find is the western mosquito fish. Its scientific name is Gambusia affinis, and this is derived from a provincial Cuban word, gambusino, meaning useless and related. And I think that this likely stems from the fact that Western mosquito fish were stocked all over the world to help deal with mosquito populations as they relate to human health. So things like West Nile and malaria. The problem is that while the mosquito fish do eat mosquitoes, which is how they were named with their common name, they will prefer to eat other things over mosquito larvae. So could be things like other native fish, even amphibians. So they've actually caused a lot of destruction in the habitats where they were added. They're a very small fish with adults reaching only about 1¼ to 2¾ inches. As I mentioned, they were stocked worldwide to help deal with a lot of human disease issues, but they cause problems where they've been introduced. And a study in northeastern Missouri showed that Western mosquito fish are a primary predator of the boreal chorus frog. So they have very wide diets where they're found. Our next group is our temperate bass. We have several bass species that fall within this group, but the more notable ones are white bass and striped bass, which the striped bass is not a native species in Missouri. The striped bass are significantly larger and they can reach 26 to 40 inches and up to 60 pounds compared to the white bass. And hybrids between the striped bass and white bass were stocked by MDC in many impoundments around the state. And in some of those, they've become a really popular game fish, reaching massive sizes. So the picture on the bottom shows someone who caught a state record striped bass at Bull Shoals Lake in 2015. But our two native temperate basses are the white and yellow bass. Our next group are our sunfishes. So these all fall within the genus Lepomis, which means scaled gill cover. So that's referring to the kind of structures here, kind of behind their eye on their cheeks. They're a really popular sport fish, targeted by people who are fishing for panfish as well as microfishing. The maximum size for this species tends to be about 10 inches and 1 pound. They are really important aquatic predators, and they'll eat anything from crayfish to other small fish to insects. And an interesting behavior from these is that the males will actually build and guard nests. So on the bottom left and bottom center, these are some pictures of some sunfish nests. So if you're ever out in streams and you look around the edges and you see these areas where all of the silt and debris has been removed and there's just fine gravel, you'll likely find a male that's guarding the nest, like pictured on the left. And those males will try to pick a really ideal location and make sure that their nest is a good size and that it's really clean in order to attract females who will come lay their eggs in their nest. The males will then fertilize those eggs and guard them until they hatch. So bass also fall within this kind of sunfish family, and they're in the genus Micropterus, which means small fin. And that refers to their kind of small first half of their dorsal fin up here. They reach maximum sizes of about 24 inches and 15 pounds and are a really popular sport fish. Some of the more notable species in the state are spotted bass and largemouth bass, as well as the smallmouth bass. Their lifespan is about 10 to 15 years. Like the sunfish, they're also really important aquatic predators, and the males of this genus will also build and guard nests, like I described with the sunfish, or the like Lepomis genus. Crappie also belong in this sunfish group. They're in the genus Pomoxis, which means opercle sharp, which refers to the spines on their gill cover, which you can see a little bit here below that black spot on the white crappie. There's kind of a sharp line that comes out. So the adults for this species, for these two species, the white and the black crappie, can reach about 15 inches and 4 pounds, and they live for about 8 years. And similar to the bass and the sunfish, they're also important aquatic predators and are really popular panfish for recreational fishing and for eating. So our next group are the darters, and these are in the kind of perch family. These are described as hummingbirds of the fish world, so they're often highly colorful, especially the males during the breeding season from about March through June or July. They're also very small-bodied and very fast. Missouri has approximately 44 darter species, so like the minnows, it's a very big fish group that we have in the state, and those 44 darter species that we have in Missouri, represent about 21% of the darter species worldwide. We have 7 species in the state that are listed as endangered, 10 that are listed as species of conservation concern, and 3 species that are endemic, which means that you can only find them in Missouri. Most of the darter species in the state do not exceed 3 inches, so they're very small bodied, except for the log perch, which is pictured in the upper right, which can reach about 7 inches. Nearly all of the species of darters, except for a handful, reside in small streams in the Ozarks and lowlands, but we do have a few species that also live in the prairie region north of the Missouri River. In this kind of perch family, we also have the walleye, which is a really common game fish. Its scientific name is Sander vitreus, which refers to the German common name for their European relative and also means glassy. They're nocturnal predators, and this vitreous also kind of refers to a material that they have in the back of their eyes that allows light to reflect really well, which allows them to see very well in low light conditions, which is why they feed at night. Adults can reach about 12 to 28 inches and weigh about 8 or more pounds. And they're really common for fishing, especially ice fishing in the upper Midwest and in Canada. A closely related species to the walleye is sauger. So the scientific name is Sander canadensis, which refers to the common name of its German relative and meaning from Canada. Adults reach a similar size to the walleye of about 12 to 15 inches and weigh up to about 4 pounds. They can live for up to 10 years. And while they are a popular sport fish, they're less commonly sought after than the walleye. We also tend to find them in more turbid water than the walleye. And their eyes are better adapted to lower light conditions than the walleye as well, which is why we tend to find them in more turbid water compared to the walleye. Our next and last group of fish are the drum. In Missouri, we have the freshwater drum. Its scientific name is Aplodinotus grunniens, which means single back and grunting. They have a organ that they can vibrate that makes a grunting sound, and they use this to communicate. If you Google freshwater drum grunting, you'll be able to hear what it sounds like, and it's really cool. This is a pretty large fish species. They can reach about 12 to 20 inches and 40 pounds and live up to about 13 years. They're also a really important recreational and commercial fish. One interesting thing about this species as well is that their ear bones, called otoliths, are quite large. So you'll see some pictured in someone's hand here in the bottom left picture. So for the fish, those ear bones are similar to the bones that we have in our ears that help them with equilibrium. So they're within a fluid-filled sac, and as that liquid moves over those ear bones, the otolith being one of those 3 different bones, it'll help them determine which way they're facing in the water column, so if they're oriented in the correct position. And we can also extract those ear bones from any type of fish and look at how old the fish is based on how many rings are there. So if you cut a tree in half and you can see all of those rings and count how old a tree is, we can do that for fish as well. Since those otoliths are made up of a lot of hard minerals that form layers as the fish ages, and you'll get different sized rings or layers in those otoliths based on how fast the fish is growing. So you'll get more deposition of those in the summer and less deposition in the winter. So we can actually tell how old fish are based on those. And a lot of people will make jewelry out of them as well, since it's a really hard bony structure and preserves well. And Native Americans would commonly historically make jewelry from these, and they were also referred to as lucky stones. Similar to the mooneye and the goldeye that I mentioned earlier, freshwater drum also play a really important role as serving as a fish host for some of our freshwater mussels in the Missouri River and other large rivers in the state. So they are the only known fish host for an endangered species of freshwater mollusk called the scale shell, which is pictured in the upper right-hand corner. So this means that no other fish species can play that role for the scale shell mussel. So in habitats where the scale shell exists, but the freshwater drum can't get to them, for example, if there was a dam put in or the habitat is not ideal for the freshwater drum, then that scale shell mussel isn't able to reproduce. It's also either the principal or the only host for some other mussel species in the state, which include the butterfly mussel, deer toe mussel, pink heel splitter mussel, and the fragile paper shell mussel. So I've talked a lot about the fish that we can commonly find in the Missouri River, but I wanted to end talking about why do we care about fish diversity? Why is this important? So in the United States and Canada, there are over 1,200 native fish species across 36 families. Sport fishing is a really popular recreational activity and is economically and culturally important. Even though only 5% of the fish that we have in North America are considered to be sport fish. So that diversity of fish is helping to support not only the game fish that a lot of people are really interested in for eating and for recreation, but also all of the fish that are converting nutrients from our terrestrial environments and the bottom of our kind of food chain in our aquatic environments as well. They provide a really important ecological link in the food chain, as I mentioned. They're important indicators of water quality and ecosystem health. So as I mentioned, for example, the blue sucker is really sensitive to poor water quality. So having them either present or absent in a river where you know they should occur is a really good, helpful indicator of if there's something else happening in that river. And then lastly, they're a really important food source for humans. So fish provide really good protein, especially if you're eating fish that are kind of lower on the food chain, which are going to have less contaminants in their meat that you're eating. We also need to think about why we care about the stream health, so like the place where these fish are living. So our streams provide a lot of ecosystem services for us on the landscape. So they can help decrease flood intervals and issues with flooding associated in our communities. Having healthy rivers and streams gives us healthy communities. So this expands access to areas where we can recreate and create good memories with our friends and our family. Conserving our fresh water helps us to conserve the water that we need to drink and for navigation. Keeping our rivers healthy also helps us kind of build the next generation of restoration leaders, kind of really teaching the importance of having healthy rivers to the young people that can help to support this as they get older. Healthy rivers also give us better climate resilience. They support more trees and more plants along the landscape that can contribute to acquisition of carbon from the atmosphere. It also supports a ton of biodiversity, having healthy streams, and also strong economies. So as I mentioned, the Missouri River is really important for agriculture in the region. So supporting stream health really overarchingly provides a lot of support for us and the things that we rely on from our ecosystems and from our communities. And then lastly, what can we do to help preserve our healthy rivers and our healthy aquatic organisms like our fishes? So one thing we can do is long-term monitoring. So this can allow us to get a good picture of how our ecosystems are changing and identify areas that might need more support in the future or areas that we're doing really well in and we can kind of shift our resources elsewhere. So my position that I have right now at the Missouri Department of Conservation has a focus on this for wadable streams across the whole state of Missouri. So this is something that the department is doing really well with. We can also really focus on citizen science and collecting a lot of information that helps inform how healthy our communities are. So this can include groups like the Missouri Stream Team that's going out and measuring water quality and looking at aquatic insects across the state, as well as our Missouri Master Naturalist groups who have a really kind of broad-reaching goal to work on conservation and supporting nature across the state. We can also do things like education and outreach. So, for example, MRBO and the Missouri River Relief and our nature centers of the Missouri Department of Conservation. So, even in urban areas, providing an outlet for education about nature to anyone who's interested. And then lastly, focusing on either maintaining or restoring our stream health across the state. So this could look like reducing stream crossings on your property or in your community, and increasing riparian buffers. So making sure that there are more trees and stable plants around our rivers to help reduce erosion and loss of good stream habitat. So lastly, I just want to thank you all for attending my talk, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. My email is also listed below, so please feel free, if you think of questions later, to reach out to me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brittany. We've got a lot of questions.
Yes. Yeah.
Ethan, you seemed like you were kind of curating questions. Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, well, fortunately, most of the people were putting them in the Q&A. I noticed there were several that were age related, which you later answered actually some of those, and we can just double check on the
Okay.
age related things, and then maybe we can pick out a couple of the ecologically centric ones that may be most challenging first in the Q&A. Dana, do you want to start with any particular one?
Only from a selfish standpoint. I have a burning desire to know the answer to Sandra Stern's question, which is how can all the American eels be female?
Oh, yeah. So I think it was probably misleading how I said it on the slide. So it's all of the American eels that we find in Missouri are female, and that's because the males are smaller bodied and they're primarily found in salt water. So they don't make the migration up to Missouri. So there are male American eels that exist, just not where we would find them in the state.
Okay, there was a related question. Let's see. That besides the American eel, are there other fish in Missouri capable of living in saltwater and freshwater?
I don't think so. I am not 100% certain on that. I know that we have like sturgeon species can migrate like through our large rivers, but I don't think any of the ones that we have migrate into saltwater. There have been a couple records of bull sharks kind of between like St. Louis and Cape Girardeau in the Mississippi River that have migrated up because they can tolerate fresh water, even though there are marine species. So that's probably the only one that I know of for sure besides the American eel. But you're almost never going to find one. I think there have been a few records in the last couple hundred years in Missouri, but it's kind of a fun one to say that, you know, we have potentially have bull shark on our fish list for Missouri.
Okay, Dana, would you like me to do like a quick screen share, or can you see the Q&A? I don't know if Brittany can see the Q&A, but I could also pull up. I've got them kind of in a Word document too, whatever might be easier.
I can see them. If you want me to just kind of go in order, if that would work. Okay.
That's fine.
So the first one that I'm seeing is what is the impact of the chestnut lamprey on their hosts and do they survive? Most fish species are going to survive. I think if the fish itself is really stressed out and there aren't kind of like a lot of food around for the host, like if they're already really kind of having a hard time, it's possible that the parasitism from the chestnut lamprey could kind of push them over the edge, but usually they'll just come and take basically like a blood meal, and when they're done feeding, they'll just kind of fall off of the fish, like they'll let go. So the hosts typically survive. Obviously, it's not ideal to have something kind of suctioning onto your side because they will use those teeth to kind of bite through the flesh a little bit too to get to like a blood source. But as long as the fish has a pretty like healthy immune system, they should recover just fine from that. The next question is, do the different sturgeon species compete? I'm not 100% certain on that one. You can have them co-occurring in the same parts of the river, but it's possible that they are kind of partitioning their habitat differently so that they wouldn't be competing for the same things necessarily, but they do have pretty similar diets, pretty similar habitat requirements. So I'm sure in some cases there are some areas where they're competing with each other. The next question was, what was the lifespan of the lake sturgeon, which I think was in the presentation. Can double check here.
They might have jumped late too.
Oh yeah, and that's no problem. You know, I might not have had it on there. I would have to look in a book. I'm not 100% certain on that one, but I know that they are a pretty long-lived species. So I imagine that it's either similar or kind of older, kind of compared to the other sturgeon species, especially since the females take about 30 years to reach sexual maturity. It's very likely that they can live quite a bit longer than that. But for an exact number, I'm not sure. Let's see. Someone asked
Brittany, I took the first part of that question out. Laura said, like, do sturgeon get made into pet food? And then she replaced it with carp. So the question is, do carp get made into pet food?
They probably do. So that's been kind of an interesting thing that I've learned living in Missouri and kind of just hearing more about like a lot of the invasive carp removal. So in the past, when like U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and other agencies were out removing a lot of the invasive carp, because it's an invasive species, they weren't allowed to do anything with it. So a lot of those fish had to go to the landfill. But we've changed the regulations on that now. So now specific like licensed vendors can take them and use them for bait for commercial fishing. And they're also commonly used for fertilizer for fields as well. So I imagine that there's the possibility for some of that being converted to things like dog food, but I don't know at what scale that's happening. I know there's also a professor at the University of Missouri that was looking into using a lot of the invasive carp meat and kind of drying it into a powder for a really good protein source in a lot of third world countries that we could provide as well. And a lot of the invasive carp that we have here, particularly like the silver and the bighead carp, are really, really common aquaculture species in other parts of the world. They have a lot of really fine bones in the meat, so a lot of people don't care for it because you have to clean them and cook them to kind of avoid that. But part of the reason why they were brought over here was because of aquaculture, and a lot of them either escaped or were released. So they're a really good human protein source too. So someone asked, is there a specific reason why the female long-nosed gar lives so much longer than the males? I'm not certain on that one either. The females are definitely going to be the ones contributing more to the population recruitment over time. And there's a really well-known theory with large-bodied, long-lived fishes that have a reproductive strategy called like periodic, which means that in good years, they can reproduce and reproduce multiple times, but in bad years, they'll basically resorb those eggs and save it for a better year. So gar fall into that group. There's an acronym for it called BOFs with 4 Fs, which stands for big, old, fat, fecund female fish. So those larger, older females contribute more to the population recruitment than the smaller females because they can produce way more eggs. They have more knowledge of the habitat that they've been living in, so they're usually able to find better nursery habitats to lay their eggs in. And they're usually fatter as well, which means that they can put more fats into their eggs, which is better for survival of the eggs and like growth of the young as well. Okay, the next question is, what are lifespans for minnows? Not very long. Most minnow species in the wild probably only live about 2 to 3 years. There are some that can live a little longer, especially in captivity. They can live more like 5 or 6 years, but they tend to be pretty short-lived. Someone asked, why or what is the reasoning for females taking so long to get to sexual maturity? 30 years. I think that's probably similar to some of the other things we've talked about. I think a lot of it would probably have to do just with physiology, and I'm not sure what the reason for that is between some of these specific species, but I mean, one advantage to them being older when they become sexually mature is that fish continuously grow throughout their whole lifetime, so they never stop growing. So the kind of, like I said, the older females and the bigger females are going to have a better ability to produce eggs and produce good eggs that will have a better chance of surviving. But for some of these species that take so long, I'm not sure if there's like a specific reason why. Oh, someone said, sorry, you didn't feature my favorite cat, the Mad Tom. Yeah, so in the catfishes group, we have a ton of really small catfishes. So this can include a lot of our Mad Toms and our stone cats. These don't get as much attention or love as the catfish species, and I do love our Mad Toms. I didn't bring them up just because I wanted the focus of this talk to be on Missouri River fishes, and the Mad Toms you're more likely going to find, especially in the Ozark streams and the smaller streams that like I work in. But yeah, if you haven't heard of a Mad Tom before, you all should look them up because they're very cute.
I think you've tackled them pretty well through there. There is one more, I think, different one that popped up over in the chat, and I don't know if you have a practiced response for this one or if it's just directing people to the right people at MDC. But Diane Berkmont asks, I don't have any stream on my suburban properties. Anything I can still do to improve the quality of streams, even though she doesn't have them on her property?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think getting involved in your like larger community, if you have the ability to either support or volunteer with some of those outreach and education organizations like Missouri River Relief, or becoming a stream team volunteer and going out to, say, some streams that are in your county and measuring water quality and collecting insects from those are good ways. Some of it can also be contacting your politicians and telling them to support any sorts of like legislature that have to do with keeping our rivers clean and water quality, anything related to pollution or invasive species. I know we have folks that work for the department that work with a lot of our legislatures, and there are a lot of professional scientific societies that also work with a lot of that as well. So if that's something that piques your interest, that's also a place you could get involved. But I think even just attending events like this from MRBO that kind of give you the knowledge that you can share with other people is also really important too. So another question. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Nope, I didn't see that. I missed it.
There's another question in the chat that asked, what is microfishing? So if you've ever seen the really short fishing poles at the store that are about the same size as the fishing poles that kids would use, they're also, a lot of people will use ice fishing poles. So you're talking something that's only about like 2 or 3 feet long, and you buy really teeny tiny hooks and put them on the end, and you just go out fishing in a lot of the small streams, trying to catch things like minnows and like the Mad Toms. So it's literally just targeting all of the non-game species in the state. A lot of people that I work with have competitions of who can collect the most or catch the most species of microfishing. And I know a lot of people that will get a snorkel mask and they'll actually swim in the streams, in the clear ones that you can see well, and they'll try to target specific fish by dangling the hook in front of them and catching them, and then just really just you take a picture of the fish and then release it. So a lot of people that are posting pictures on iNaturalist are really into microfishing.
Thank you. I was really worried there. I was afraid that you're going to talk about somebody with a mounted Topeka shiner, as a wall mount or something like that. And But
I mean, honestly, I have talked with my coworkers before about how neat it would be to have a like taxidermied mount of some small like minnow species that you could have some kind of like ones that live more on the bottom, like your chubs, and then some minnows, and have them kind of like swimming through the lands or the like the mount. So if I were to ever mount a fish on my wall, it would probably be some smaller minnows and darter species versus like a bass or something. So another question on here was about the drum communicating and asking if any other Missouri fish communicate in a similar way. Um, Not certain on that one. I think, if I'm remembering correctly, I think catfish have the ability to communicate as well. Unless I'm thinking of a different fish group, but I'm pretty sure it's catfish. They have all of our fish in the state have something that we either call a swim bladder or a gas bladder. And the only difference between those is how the fish get air into it. But it's basically an organ in their body that allows them to help either float or sink in the water column by adding air to that bladder or releasing it. And catfishes belong to a family of fish that have these special kind of structures associated with that, and so they can release air from that and cause those like bones to vibrate, and they can communicate that way. But other than that, I can't think of any other examples from Missouri. Somebody said, growing up, I was always told that the fish we caught to eat were perch, but the photos you showed don't look the same. Do they get mixed up with crappie? I can't remember if I think we do have one perch species in the state. If we do, it's a yellow perch. And that is a really common fish species that, at least from where I'm from in the upper Midwest, people like to fish for and eat. I personally love crappie. I think it's delicious. And I've eaten bass and sunfish as well. And the buffaloes are actually really good for eating. I have had some smallmouth buffalo before, and that was also really good. And our sucker species in the state are also, well, a couple of them are really common for eating, or the red horse, not the suckers. It's like golden red horse, I've heard, are delicious. Somebody asked about how fish serve as host for mussels and how that works. So some mussel species will develop something called a lure. It's basically like a kind of fleshy structure that they can slightly open their shells a little bit and move it out. And some of them will actually look like fish. It has like an eye spot, and the mussel can like flutter them, so it looks like a fish kind of swimming. And so a fish that's swimming by that mussel with the lure might think that that's a prey item that they want to eat. And so when they go to strike at it, it'll burst these really small structures inside of that. You can picture almost something like a straw that has a bunch of like little beads in it. So when that structure bursts, it's releasing a bunch of the larval mussels called glochidia. And those will actually clamp on to the fish's gills. And they'll parasitize off of that fish until they've reached a certain size. And then as that fish is moving around, once those mussels have reached the size that they need in order to be more like free living, they'll actually drop off of the fish host into, and wherever they land is basically where they live then. This is pretty common. A lot of mussel species do this. Some of them are generalists, so they can use like a whole family of fishes. So for example, like any sunfish would be a suitable host. There are others where they're specialists, so they can really only use one fish host. That's not to say that a different type of fish species could like attack the lure and get the glochidia on their gills. It's just there's something really specific between the mussel and the fish. If it's not the suitable host, I think the fish's immune system can actually boot off those glochidia, and then they're not going to be viable and they won't grow. The tricky part with this is that we don't know a lot about fish hosts for mussels. So there are some species that we know a lot, and we know, they either need this one particular host or they can use a bunch of these hosts. There are some where we don't know if how good that host is. So for example, they might be a good host about 20% of the time. So there's about a 20% survival rate for those Lochidia on that fish host. But yeah, it's a really interesting dynamic, and it gets really tough when you're looking at conservation of freshwater mussels, which are declining on a nationwide scale, a lot of it due to habitat loss and pollution. But if they lose their fish host in the section of river that they live and they can't reproduce, then they can't get up and move. They're kind of stuck where they are in the riverbed. So that can be really problematic. The next question I see is, how do female eels get from the ocean to Missouri? So they just swim up. It's a huge migration. It's really energetically costly. So yeah, they swim up. So again, having impoundments and dams and barriers to that migration can really impact these like migratory species. Someone asked, what is the biggest threat to the fish in our section of the Missouri River? It's probably, I don't work on big rivers, so I can't say for sure, but I think probably habitat alteration and changes in flow is going to be a really big issue for them, as well as like water quality. I saw in the chat someone just asked which river is behind me. This is a picture taken from the North Fork of the White River down in the Ozarks. This is one of the rivers where I was catching one of those rare stream fishes for my work at the university. And it's just really pretty. Any of the Ozark streams are. Someone asked, do goldfish come from people dumping or flushing their pets? Flushing, I don't know, but dumping pets is a really big problem, and that's for more than just fish too. So that can be for things like snakes and even crayfish, which I'm sure Dr. Stratton will talk about when she gives her seminar coming up in March. But yeah, either dumping pets from the aquarium trade or from bait is a huge problem and can cause a lot of introduction for invasive species. Someone asked, how prevalent is mercury contamination in the Missouri River? I did pull up one slide, so I don't know the exact answer to that. Let's see. Share. But for any of our water bodies in Missouri, the Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services has a page on their website for Missouri fish advisories. And so this can advise you on if there are contaminants that you should be worried about for different species of fish in different water bodies. Mercury is kind of a problem all over the US, but there's definitely hot spots where it's like better or worse to eat fish from. But they'll include advisories in here about how many servings of fish and how often you should eat them in order to stay safe from not having too much of those contaminants in your diet. I mentioned this a little bit in the talk, but also eating things that are lower on the food chain helps with this. So the reason why a lot of these fish can get really high contaminant loads in their muscles is through something called bioaccumulation. So if you imagine that a lot of the insects in a stream are eating contaminated food. So for example, with mercury, they're going to have small amounts of mercury in their bodies. And then if a fish eats a lot of those insects, they're going to get all of those contaminants from the food they're eating. And then if a bigger fish eats that fish and so on, the amount of contaminants that the fish are eating as you move up the food chain gets higher and higher. So eating the more like kind of top predator fish species like walleye and gar, especially the long-lived fish species, you're going to have a lot more of a risk of getting those contaminants than if you eat something that's more of like something that eats more on plants or insects, so things lower on the food chain. And somebody asked, with respect to the fish that live to be 100 years old, how does one determine the age of the fish? So the ages that I mentioned for the buffaloes, for example, those were all aged using those ear bones. So with the really big fish like that, you actually embed those ear bones in epoxy, and you use a special otolith saw, like a circular saw kind of that will cut out a really thin section of that. And then you can put it under a microscope and take a picture of it. And then you literally just count the rings from the center out like you would for a tree. I don't know if you
I,
all have other questions in the chat or not.
I think you tackled them all really well there.
Brittany, I have one quick question of my own with the
Mhm.
you you gave a big range of lifespans of fish, and I can understand that some are like smaller and shorter lived, but it seemed like there was some really large fish that had some would live to be over 100 and some would live to be 17 or 20. Do we know the reason for that huge of a range of potential lifespans?
Mm-mm. I don't.
That's
I haven't come
interesting.
across anything um, talking about that, but I also haven't like looked up that information either. So it's possible that there's an answer for that, but I'm not aware. Um,
It's
yeah, I'm not too
interesting.
sure.
We're bird
Yeah,
people.
because
We could ask the same question about birds. We have
and I would not know
albatrosses.
the answer.
And
Actually, now that
we
you
have,
say that, that's true.
but they're both very prehistoric. If you look at like the scales and just the way these sturgeon look, they do look like was saying dinosaurs. They're those big, what they call
Mhm.
ganoid scales. And then you look at some of our bird species, the ones that are less recently evolved, they look very prehistoric. If you look at, you know, great blue herons and things like that. So,
Yeah.
mm.
I just saw one more question pop up in the chat. Someone asked, are the minnows we purchase at bait and tackle shops different than the ones found in our rivers, lakes, and streams? So would they have to be disposed of away from the water? So I'd say as a general rule of thumb, even if it is a species that you can find in the water body that you're fishing in, you should never release live bait just because they might introduce disease to those native populations. Or if they're not found there, they can possibly reproduce and become an invasive species and compete with a lot of the native species. I think one of the more common bait fishes or like minnows that you'll find are fathead minnows, and those are native in Missouri. But we do see them like found all over the state, and a lot of this has to do with like bait bucket introductions. Um, but no, it gets kind of tricky. I mean, I've been up to some kind of bait stores and fishing stores up in like Wisconsin during ice fishing season, and I'll just see them list them as like crappie minnows. I'm like, that's not a real species. So then I'm like looking and trying to figure out what it actually is. So a lot of times you won't even see like the species name that's listed on there. It's just something kind of generic that's not a real thing. Or like that name doesn't correspond to like a real fish. So that can be kind of tricky too. And I think there's also instances where sometimes bait dealers might think that they're buying one thing, like say like a fathead minnow, but then they're given something else. So yeah, I would say just as a general rule of thumb, um, even if it seems kind of cruel, like throwing away your bait fish rather than like leaving them in or like dumping them in like the stream or the lake that you're in is going to be the best practice. Someone just asked if they missed any mention or discussion about caviar in the black market trade in regards to sturgeon or other endangered species. Um, I mentioned it a little bit with paddlefish, but yeah, sturgeon are also a really popular kind of caviar species. And I'm not too familiar with the regulations that we have on those. I think in Missouri, like if you were to catch like a paddlefish, you know, during the season for them, and it was a female and they were gravid and had eggs, I believe that like you can keep those and eat them yourself. You're just not allowed to transport them outside of the state. Um, but yeah, I mean, it definitely is an issue, and it's something that our conservation agents are, you know, kind of monitoring for and on the lookout for because overharvest and especially just to harvest caviar and then discard the fish is part of the reason why some of these species are declining.
I've been rethinking the whole caviar thing when I've seen that there's a fish farm for them, but then they have to feed the fish that are producing the eggs a bunch of other fish. It's really, yeah, it's something to look into, everybody, if you're into
Yeah,
caviar.
aquaculture in general is an interesting thing. Because I mean, fish are a really great protein source, but you can also have, you know, if you think about the amount of resources going in to produce, like, say, like a salmon at a farm, it's a lot more than if you were to eat a fish that has a more like plant diet or like, a non, I guess, like high protein diet. So things like tilapia, for example. There's a really good book called For Fish that I would recommend if anyone's interested in kind of reading more about like fish harvest and aquaculture. That's a really good one. It's for like the number.
Any more in there, Dana? Do you see? Look at all these compliments in here.
Yeah,
Yeah,
They
it's
did
really
they
nice.
that
that was incredibly informative.
was great.
I'm obsessed with fish. I like fell in love with them once I started taking like my first fish class in college. So I just love talking about fish. I think they're awesome. They're also another fun fact, I guess, before we leave. Their fishes are the most diverse vertebrate group on Earth. We have more than 36,000 species of fish in the world, and about half of those are found in freshwater, which is crazy because freshwater is less than 1% of all the water on Earth. So, like, that diversity is crazy and super cool.
Wow.
All right, everybody. I guess I'm not seeing any more Q&As come in. Brittany, we will, of course, share the recording, but also the chat with you so that you can see all the comments in the chat. So thank
That
you
would be great.
so much for this presentation.
Thank you for the invite. This was awesome.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Bye.